Welcome to A Place for Film, the IU Cinema podcast. On this week's episode, we're talking about the Student 3D event. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. My name is Andy Hunsucker.
And I'm Jason Thompson.
And on this week's episode, we're talking about the Student 3D event that happened earlier this week. Our old pal Chris Eller is here to talk about it.
Hello.
And his student, Deborah, is it Williams?
Yes.
Deborah Williams is here as well to talk about it. You had a film in that event, and we're in the 3D class. We have a great legacy of people from the 3D class in the program. Mm-hmm. They've gone on to do great things.
Sometimes for pay.
Yeah, exactly. Some of them have been paid for their work, which is amazing. So we'll talk about all of that a little bit later. All right. Well, let's talk about the Student 3D event and the 3D class in general. So Chris Eller and Deborah Williams are here to talk about this. So Chris, just in case, every podcast is someone's first podcast. So why are you here? What do you do here at the university involving 3D?
I do a lot of things at the university, but involving 3D, I work with our University Information Technology Services Advanced Visualization Lab. And so we designed and built a 3D camera because we thought we've been doing 3D since the mid-'90s, and it was time to put that to storytelling. And in doing so, we were able to develop and teach a 3D production class in the Department of Telecommunications here at IU. And we just wrapped up our 5th semester of teaching that class. Mm-hmm. So I had to learn how to produce in 3D and then how to teach it so other people could produce in 3D.
Yeah. So how many universities now are teaching 3D production?
In the U.S., it's under 10. When we first started, there were 3. It was us, NYU, and USC. And now we've added one of the Florida universities, somebody in Washington, and Notre Dame has been doing something, and a couple others. I don't have an exact count because, unfortunately, it's hard to find some of the information. It gets buried.
Yeah.
But less than 10.
All right. So tell us about the class. How does it work? How do people get into it? Who's taking this class?
This semester's class, we had 2 juniors and 10 seniors that took it. We didn't have any grad students this time, but we have had 1 or 2 grad students in the past that take it for credit and have to do some extra work for that. But this year's class has been more senior heavy than in the past. It's a 400-level course, so they have to pass a couple of prerequisite courses, and then they write an application to get in. And so we look at their grade, the previous courses, and what they've said about 3D. Well, they're actually applying for several 400-level classes, and then they rate, what's your first choice, what's your second choice, third choice. I'm sure Deborah can tell us about what she did for that. But basically, we're taking advanced students in media design and production is the track that the students are in. And those that are interested in doing stereoscopic 3D filmmaking, that's who we take.
All right. So, Deborah, when did you first hear about the 3D class, and how did you go about getting involved in it?
I heard about the 3D class this past spring semester. My roommate was actually in it. So I saw the rig and thing before I even knew what the rig was. So it was in our house once, and it was just a huge thing. I was like, what is this? But so I heard about it then, and she made it sound like a lot of fun and really interesting. Actually, I had no idea it existed until then. Kind of weird that this whole thing was going on. A lot of students don't even know it exists. But yeah, I thought it was a really cool idea, and I never really even thought about shooting in 3D in college at all. 3D is still just so up and coming. It's you don't expect to go to college and learn that, at least not when I started out. So I don't know, it's just really interesting, a whole new world. Yeah, you mentioned once that it was we're pretty good in 2D, but in terms of 3D, we're all in kindergarten, and that's so true.
Yeah,
especially film-wise. So.
So tell me about sort of the structure of the class. How do you teach someone how to shoot in 3D?
Well, first we have to talk about what makes a good story. Because if you don't have a good story, what's the point, right? So we just talk about story structure a lot, and then about how 3D works, why we see things in 3D. So you get some biology in their eyes and the visual cortex and processes that go on in the brain in order to decode what your two eyes are seeing, and to process that as 3D. So we talk about, kind of what it is and how it works. And then they start with some basic exercises with still cameras. So they get a couple 3D still cameras and get to go run around for a half hour and shoot a bunch of stereographs, which is a 3D photograph. To just start with that. And then we look at those in the class. We have a 3D TV that we brought over to the production lab, and we look at the stereographs and analyze them. We critique not only for, composition and what you have in there, but also why it looks the way it does and why some things work and other things don't. So they start with still photography. And then we move into pitch stories. You remember the pitch?
I do.
Pitches
Yes.
were horrifically wonderful. and then the class selects. They vote for so each student pitches a story. So there were 12 students this semester, and from those, they vote for their top ones that they want to work on, and we picked the 7 that were good. We had enough time during the semester to produce 7 stories. And so they all voted on which were the 7 they wanted to work on, and then they voted again or did some horse trading to get onto the project that they want to do. So each of the students filmed on 4 of them. So the first 6 were done as half the class, and then the last one was done as the complete class. And that was time constraints. So they had 6 crew members for the first 6 stories, and then on the last story they had 12 crew members, which was too many. But it was the way to get everybody so that some of them didn't have 4 and some had 3.
Yeah.
So, and that's really the idea there. And then we just refine and talk about 3D and look at 3D after they produce it. We would critique in class and talk about it and kind of dissect what's going on in there and apply lessons learned to the next project.
Yeah.
I'm sure you can
Yes.
relate.
So you put up those stereographs, those still images at the end of the sort of at the end of
At
the
the
event,
showcase, yeah.
which I thought those looked amazing. Like I had never seen you sort of put them up on
The slideshow.
you put them up on the internet, and I look at them and I'm like, okay, I can see 2 images slightly ajar, but it doesn't mean anything. But seeing those on the screen, like still images, it really impressive. It really. I think I almost like those images better than like most 3D movies I've seen. Like that was more impressive than most of the 3D stuff I've seen, even in like Hollywood. I just loved those images.
Yeah, the behind the scenes are fun because I asked them to document the behind the scenes, but I don't tell them why until we get closer to the end.
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh no.
Yeah, it was a surprise to see what was up on the screen there. My mom actually had no idea. She's like, "How did you guys take those pictures?" She's like, "I saw the camera in the background." She didn't know that a 3D digital camera even existed. So
Yeah.
it's weird how people still don't. It's not even spoken about really 3D at all.
Yeah.
Which is great for people looking for a job because now you've got this experience and
Yeah.
knowledge.
Yeah. So tell us about shooting in 3D. So you've done 2D productions before. Tell us about which films you worked on, what you did on them, and what was different about doing it in 3D.
Oh, okay. Well, I worked on the first one that the whole class did. So that was Pizza Rumble, but I was the editor. So I actually only got to be there for the shoot for a little while because I had like a previous engagement to go to. So setting it up takes a lot longer than you might think and takes a lot longer than doing 2D. Everything that you think that's going to take so long in 2D will take about double the time in 3D just because of how big the rig is, trying to get the space, and it's just kind of a mess.
So you did get better.
Yes, we did get better. That is the thing.
Yes.
That happened. So that was nice. It was nice to see, like, the first one was definitely an experiment almost, like, just to see, like, what we can do with this, like, what are the constraints, and we found out. So, and then the second film I worked on was Trail to Step, and I was a stereographer for that one, which means I was the camera person. So I actually was responsible for dragging the camera around in the woods.
Yeah.
So that was cool.
And getting good 3D.
Yeah, actually.
That's your fault if it's not good.
No, yeah, it was. It would have been my fault, but
But it was all good.
yes, actually. I thought it actually went pretty well. So you just always have to talk to you have 2 camera people, actually, the first AC and stereographer. So you always have to compare the different cameras and make sure that they're in line and doing the same things all the time.
Mm-hmm.
If they're not, then you get pain when you watch it in 3D. So as you might have seen, some things happen.
There was a couple of
Some pain and
films that
suffering.
I
Yeah.
had to look away,
They
unfortunately.
were like cover one eye or
Yeah.
something like that. So
Yeah.
things like that happen. So you have to think about so many more things. A lot of little things to take into account there, just to make sure that you're not damaging anybody when you actually get to show your film. And then I worked on my film, which was The Inn, as the director person. So that was exciting because we had to shoot in such a short amount of time, but that was a constraint in itself, I suppose. But we all just kept pushing until the end, and then
Yeah.
it's all in that pre-production, that planning. So that part actually for me, the constraint there was just time. And then the last film, which was Passing Door.
Passing Door.
So
And what did you do on Passing Door?
I was the line producer, which means organizing things, but usually the director actually, because usually the director is the one who wrote the story, so they mainly like want to find the things themselves. So it's kind of hard to try to balance finding what they want as opposed to like them trying to figure out. It's just a lot of work to get done, a lot of stress, I think, especially for the director. But he did a great job
Yeah.
doing everything. So
Yeah, that was a big lesson for the students is delegation of roles and trusting that the other people in your crew are going to do what you need them to do. Because when you're doing your own independent projects or in some of the earlier class projects, you're responsible for doing a lot of the tasks that are necessary. But with 3D, you just can't. You have to have a crew and you have to trust that the stereographer and first AC are going to take care of the camera and the line producer is going to take care of location and getting out the schedule and making sure everybody knows where to go and the editor is going to cut a good movie. And although everybody does their job.
Yeah. That's something that we had Joe Swanberg on the show a few months ago, and that's something that he said about his last film, Drinking Buddies. So Joe Swanberg's like an indie film
I saw that,
maker. Yeah. And Drinking Buddies was the first movie that actually had like a budget. So he didn't have to do everything. And so that's what he said the biggest difference with Drinking Buddies was. He didn't have to like do everything, including like craft services himself. It was like he would show up and he would just do the one job. And that was so alien to him from everything else he's done previously. But yeah, it seems like a skill that definitely a lot of student filmmakers are going to need to learn.
it's kind of rough too, because you don't know. Yeah, it's a bunch of trust falls everywhere, and so it's kind of rough, and especially if you haven't worked with people before, it's you don't know what to expect. So a lot of people try to take it on themselves, and it just ends up being a huge stress. But yeah, it's something that we need to learn. I think still something to practice.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of these films. I can't remember the titles of all of them, but let's see. I've got a couple here written down. One of my favorites was Robot Camp.
Yes.
Robot Camp is like 10 different 80s movies all like smushed together. And a lot of it's done really well. So it's basically it's like Revenge of the Nerds. at
Revenge
Robot
of the
Camp.
Nerds and Friday the 13th and several others, 10 others.
Yeah.
But those are kind of the two overriding themes that happen there.
Yeah. So I like that one a lot. That one was really funny. There was a couple scenes that didn't really work, but
Those are some of the technical issues.
Yeah.
So like story-wise?
Yeah.
or-
Well, there was
okay.
this one scene where they were trying to do like a sort of all-in-one shot where like we start on this side of the room, we finish on that side of the room.
the long take there, yep.
I thought the technically it was fine, but it was just the material they had for that section wasn't, I don't think, strong enough to
Fulfill.
do that whole thing. So cut it down to like one or two of those, and I think it would have been really great. But the director and writer clearly knew how to pull people in to that sort of thing, because they got me in right at the beginning. The first 5 minutes of that movie are just genius. And then it does that scene and I kind of lose it for a little bit. And then I get right back into it a little bit later. And the ending is just perfect. It's like it's a freeze frame fist
Yeah.
pump,
Yep.
jump in the air. It's it's like perfect. Exactly what was needed for that.
Yeah, he worked really hard on that. I think it looked great. But
Yeah, that was William Kuchenberg, and that was his passion story. He really had a fire for that story.
Yeah.
And it came in as a 15 or 16 page script, and then he whittled it down. But the runtime on that was just under 14 minutes.
Yeah.
Most of the rest of them were about 6 or 7 minutes.
Yeah. So it's the plot is a group of nerds are at robot camp and they build their robots, but then they're they're at a campfire and they're told about the jock that was killed a year ago on this night, and
And he hates the nerds because the
Yes.
nerds got him suspended from school for the last football game. So he never
Yeah.
played his last game, driving angry in the woods and dies.
Yeah, and and he basically comes back as a zombie, and
Yep.
instead of brains, he says nerds.
Yeah. Nerds! Yes, very fun. But the nerds are able to defend themselves, though not without fatalities.
Yes.
There was a lethal wedgie
Yes.
given by the
See,
jock.
that was the genius part. That
Yeah.
he doesn't kill people by chopping off their heads or, stabbing them. He kills them by giving them
a
lethal
wedgie.
wedgies.
Yeah.
That was genius. That was just genius. I loved that. There was another one with a horror theme. I don't know the title off the top of my head. I think it was the one you mentioned, the one in the woods.
Trailed Step,
I think that's the one
where
where
everybody kept dying.
The
Yes.
two
Yes,
women
that
and
one.
2 men and
Yeah.
go camping, yeah.
I at first I was like, where's this movie going? And then people just started dying for no reason. And I thought
Mm-hmm.
I just loved that. I thought it was just genius. It's like, let's not, whatever, just they died. Let's move on. Let's
Right.
stop talking
Well,
about it.
Baby Lester.
Yeah,
Baby Lester's killing
That's a real
them.
thing, but yeah,
Yeah.
Baby Lester's supposed to be like that. Is supposed to be a real curse, but yeah, it is really funny. It
Yeah.
just drops
Like literally
flies, yeah.
someone looks at somebody
Yeah.
and just
Well,
cuts back and
as
dead.
soon
You
as
leave
you
the
walk
frame, you're
off
dead.
frame or you
Yeah.
leave the group, and it's all the horror, tropes.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
let's talk about your film a little bit.
And,
So what? Tell us. Go ahead and tell us about it.
I'll tell you about it. Yeah. I got the idea basically from gee whiz, why can't I think of it? Edgar Allan Poe's story, Telltale Heart,
Okay.
where the guy's looking in at this man who just has these eyes that are just haunting him basically, and he can't stand it anymore. And he goes in, and what he basically does is sneaks in and kills a man, hides him under the floorboards, and he's so excited about it, and he just invites the police in, and is fine with it. And then all of a sudden he can't take it anymore and confesses. So I took that and just basically put it with a girl going to an inn, and the annoyance is this other guest there who's humming, and she just can't stand it anymore. So she just offs her, and at the end she still can't take the humming. But
yeah.
I liked my idea still, but I think characterization's really rough.
Yeah.
It's a rough thing to get through, but
Yeah. Well, I felt like it could have used more backstory.
yeah,
You
I
know,
think so too.
like
There's
a little,
some-
just a little more, just a few connecting bits
there's
in there.
just like those spots I don't know.
Yeah. But I thought the 3D in that was really good. I didn't have to look away at all.
Yeah, I did.
There
I
was
appreciated that.
There's a couple of handheld shots of the thing, and I couldn't watch any of those in a lot of it because I don't know. Does the rig maybe flex a little bit when it's on a shoulder mount? Or
There is a little bit, but for those handhelds, they did a pretty good job with it. What you're probably experiencing is just a lot of camera movement.
Yeah.
And it can be disorienting.
Yeah, there was the one I can't remember the title of that one either, where the guy is leaves his house and then comes back in. There's another dude.
That was
standing
Mystic
there.
Message.
Yeah, that
Oh, yeah.
that one I don't think I watched very much of that just because I could not keep my eyes on it.
That one had some technical challenges, which may have been due to the way it was set up, or if the cameras are just acting funny
Yeah.
that day. But there were a couple scenes that exhibit what's called temporal phase,
Yeah.
where things aren't moving exactly in sync between the two cameras, and your brain does not like that.
Yeah.
And so that was a technical challenge on that part. And then there's the close-up of the cell phone.
Yeah,
That scene was very problematic, and the students had to work through that. See, the beautiful and terrible thing about the class is they get to make mistakes
Yes.
and learn from them.
Yeah.
But we get to see those mistakes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And that's
Yeah.
the challenge.
it's always a learning. Close-ups are hard in 3D, especially if you don't know.
Yeah, and how to do it, and it's tough to do. And there's a thing we talked about in class right at the beginning that we told them the best thing that you're going to get to do in this class is exhibit your films in the cinema.
Yeah.
The worst thing in this class is you're going to see your films in the cinema.
Yeah, so many things just shine right in front of you. You're like,
Yeah.
oh wow.
Oh, yeah, I was listening. They were mostly sitting toward the front, and I was sitting toward the middle of the auditorium there. And when a bad scene came up, I was just listening and could hear the groans and kind of like, oh,
Please, no.
And there it is, 30 feet wide. Yeah,
Thrilled to see. Yeah, it's perfect.
I mean,
So when you're shooting, I mean, is that are there some things that are just very apparent when you're shooting, like in terms of the camera failing or it not quite being in sync?
Yes and no. And sometimes it just depends. Like I know towards the end the cameras got a little bit testy. Like on my shoot day, for the end, like they would keep going to playback. So sometimes they just do strange things and it's hard to fix. But it's not always obvious is the problem. It's like, and you always have to communicate. Communication is key, and like so much in the world. But like if you don't speak to your first AC and you're the stereographer, there's a chance that it's probably not going to look very good. So it may not be apparent unless you're looking at like the monitor in the back, which allows you to see both cameras set up in 3D. But sometimes people turn that off if they're running low on battery for that, and so they don't actually see it. So it's definitely, sometimes it's a guessing game, and you're just like, well, and here we go, because you only get to see half of it. If you turn off the monitor, only the left person's like, I think this looks good, and the right person's like, I think this looks good. So
Yeah, the big trick is it's two cameras that have been melded into one, but the operator's responsibility is to make sure that the two cameras then behave as one, and that is not easy.
Yeah. Yeah, I got to sit in on a 3D film shoot over the summer and then a little bit later, and it's a bizarre thing. Like it's like you're standing there looking at this thing and somebody zooms in and like you see half the image, like this ghost
Yeah, you
image
saw
go past,
yep.
and I can see how that could get really bizarre.
Yeah, you need to be detail oriented, which is a good thing in filmmaking anyway. There are a lot of details that will bite you later on. And if you can catch them before you hit record, then you're going to save yourself a lot of trouble later. So being detail oriented is something that the students are clearly learning in this class, because it will punish you.
yeah.
Whereas some stuff, with 2D stuff, you can skate by with forgetting to do something, but not in 3D.
Yeah.
The editor will see it, and everybody keeps saying, like, you might have heard, oh, we'll fix it in post, we'll fix it in post. What? I mean, when you're the editor, you're like, what? No. I don't know if we can do that. I don't know if that's possible.
And you shouldn't have to fix these things. And with 3D, you can bake in some problems that you cannot repair.
Yeah.
At least not without a lot of experience, money, and time, of which they don't have. They had 1 week for post-production. So they had 7 days to shoot each of the productions, and then 7 days after that for post. Yeah. And then we watched them in class, did critique, and that was through the semester. And then after they were critiqued, the editors got notes from that, and then they would further polish to prepare for going to the cinema. Yeah. So what we saw in the cinema was polished up from what we saw in class.
Yeah.
Now, is that done just based on whatever time they have, or?
They make the time, hopefully.
Okay. I just didn't know, obviously they would probably have to move on to other projects, so.
Yeah. Well, and they alternate. They take turns on the projects, so there was a little time in between. But really, it was a lot of, Deborah had to come back in on her own schedule. And have that discipline to come in and do the polishing to get ready for the cinema.
Yeah. Is that intimidating, knowing that it's going to be playing at the cinema? Had you ever experienced that before?
No. I mean, I'd helped with one of the films that I'd seen at the cinema last year, but not like this, like where nearly every one of them was going to be up there that I at least had, some part in. So that was a little terrifying. Plus, it's like, you don't really realize that even as a person behind the camera, it's still nerve-wracking to see what you've put on screen. Like, being an actor, I feel like I'd be totally nervous about that. But even when you're behind the camera, you're like, wow, yep, this is still going to happen, and everybody's going to, like, associate this with me still, at least anybody in the cinema. So it's a little nerve-wracking. Yeah. But it was still fun to actually see it. I mean, nerve-wracking, but still exciting.
Good. Mm-hmm. So tell me about The Passing Door, which I thought was really, really good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was our last one. We saved that one for last, partly because of its complexity, and we screened them in the cinema in their order that they were produced. Yeah. So you got to see an evolution of skill and knowledge. But yeah, Passing Door was the final production, and we put it back there partly because it was on multiple locations. We knew that in the pitch and when we discussed it in class when we were setting the schedule, we knew that one would be complex as far as its production goes, and it was one of the more nuanced stories.
Yeah.
So we wanted to make sure that the crew had time not only to prepare for it in pre-production for them, but for the director to work with the actors as well, because it was a silent piece. So it was
Yeah.
all emoting,
Yeah.
and that takes direction. I got to say, watching the footage as the students were editing it, we were editing with camera audio. So you could hear the director. That was Bob Salek, who was
Yeah.
the writer-director. And with the camera audio, it was like if you ever saw Shadow of the Vampire, where the director is talking the actor through the scene while they're recording it.
Yeah.
And it was interesting to hear Bob coaching Roy Sillings, who was the main character in that, to hear him getting the coaching and reacting to what was going on in the scene.
I think that helps a lot, though. Like when you talk to actors, when they, it helps me too sometimes. Like when you actually get to speak through it. Like I did Campus Movie Fest and had my friend who's like she doesn't really act that much or whatever. She just did it for fun. And so when I was talking to her, she said it helped her like just dramatically.
Were you one of the finalists?
No, because I mean, we just kind of do it for fun and just. So it was a good time though. Like, but
We go to camp. We've been to Campus Movie Fest the last couple of years, so I didn't know if I'd seen your film.
oh
or
no,
anything
probably
like
not.
that.
It's just like a silly little film about. I had my two friends like in it, and they were supposed to be fighting, kind of like this girl likes a guy, and they just
Oh, okay.
go into this dream world, and she battles her,
Okay.
if you will, and she just dresses up like a kind of like it's a campy film almost, like she
Okay.
dressed up like a silly villain, but yeah.
There you go. And there is a 3D section at Campus Movie Fest. So we have had
didn't know that.
previous classes do partner up and do Campus Movie Fest 3D.
Yeah.
And one of them from our class made it pretty far. Did not win, but made it pretty far. But they have to shoot on the worst camera ever. They couldn't use our rig. They were sent a camera that was just a horrible 3D camera.
Yeah.
And make the best they can with it. But it did very well. That was like 2 years ago. So
Yeah.
Is it the same time constraint, or is it? Did they give you a little bit more time? No, same amount
now
of time.
everything's the same, but you got to edit on the particular software, and you got to use this little camera.
Sure.
And
That's interesting
Hopefully
that
it
they
works.
make you use that camera because I think for
It's
regular you can
sponsorship.
use. Oh, okay, I thought you could use any camera for a regular one.
for that. But for the 3D stuff, they got the idea that nobody has a 3D camera, so we have to send one. Well, if Panasonic is going to sponsor this, we have to use a Panasonic camera, and you can't use other stuff. And
Yeah.
so it's quite a challenge. It may be more challenging than it strictly needed to be.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there is a Campus Movie Fest 3D.
Cool. All right. Well, I think that'll do it for this week. So thank you, Chris. Thank you, Deborah. Really, really enjoy the 3D event every year. I don't think I got to make it last year, but I was here this year.
You were.
Thanks for
And you're
coming.
going to have
Yeah,
more
thanks, guys.
opportunities because
Yeah.
we're going to do another 3D showcase, not of student work, but of research, faculty work in the spring. And then coming up this summer, we have the Independent Filmmakers Convention Part 2. Indie Film Con 2 is going to happen, and that has a block of 3D as well.
Cool.
So we have a lot of opportunities to still, further the art and get more students experience on working on 3D. Because some of them go out to LA and get jobs. Sometimes they pay.
Yeah.
So it's pretty nice.
Yeah. So we will be off next week because of the Christmas holiday, and then we should be back the next week. We hope, and then it's spring. We're rolling. It's going to be cinema schedule, city lights, all sorts of stuff. There are some. I've gotten a little peek at the cinema schedule. There are some big names coming next semester. It's going to be nuts. So we'll wait for John to come on to talk about that, or maybe it'll be the new assistant director. Who knows? We got a new assistant director at the cinema as well. But we'll talk about that coming up in the future. For now, thank you guys for watching and listening. My name is Andy.
And I'm Jason.
This has been, and always will be, A Place for Film. A Place for Film is recorded at WFIU Studios in Bloomington, Indiana.